Welcome back to the GSMC Sports Podcast. We are headed into our final segment here where we are going to be talking about the NFL teams that are under the most pressure to win this upcoming season. Now, win can be a little bit fluid. This is obviously talking at least a, conference finals appearance, but for a lot of these teams, I think that there is even more pressure on Super Bowl appearance, maybe a Super Bowl win. Again, varies a little bit based off of the team itself, but I have my top 6 teams here. I know a little unorthodox, but I think that there were 6 clear teams that were under a significant amount of pressure for this year. I do have some honorable mentions for the Steelers, the Jaguars, and the Dolphins. There are some QBs and or coaches that sort of need to prove themselves within this group, and what sort of kept them out of this list for me as a whole was the fact that they are all in the AFC. Obviously, we know the AFC runs through Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs, where the NFC is obviously a lot more open, so there's less excuses there. And that it wasn't the sole reason, but it was a little bit of a tiebreaker for me. So getting into this list here, number 6, I have the Detroit Lions. The Lions have been America's favorite underdog the past couple of seasons, dating back to when they were on Hard Knocks and we were really introduced to the character that is Dan Campbell. And they have continually improved over the course of Campbell's tenure there in Detroit, with the comeback in the second half of the season in 2022-23, and then obviously leading up to their NFC Championship run last season. Fair or not, a lot of people were very displeased with some of Campbell's decisions in the second half of that collapse when they lost to the Niners in the NFC Championship. I think he got a little more a little more blame than he deserved, but because nobody really talked about the players themselves unraveling in that one, but he does definitely deserve some of the blame. I think more so than the fourth down decisions, it was the decision to use a timeout on their final drive that essentially made them have to go for an onside kick where the success rate is just so low, and that essentially ended it there. But that's not really the point. One way or another, he faced scrutiny coming out of the game. He faced it on, head on. He wasn't really afraid to sort of take that criticism. And as he put it in the post-game press conference, the Lions are now a known entity. Like, there's no more sneaking up on anybody. Everybody is expecting them to be competitive this upcoming season. So there's no going back. There's no sort of catching teams off guard. And they still have a lot of youth. We've talked at length about their rookie class from last season and how impactful they were. Some of the other young players that they recently drafted on that roster as well and in that core. And I think that what was key for them is they were able to retain both of their coordinators in Ben Johnson, who was an extremely sought-after head coach candidate this past offseason, and defensive coordinator Aaron Glenn. So there's not really a ton of excuses for them in this upcoming year. I thought that they definitely deserved to be on this list in terms of pressure, but we have a handful of teams under more pressure. Number 5, I have the San Francisco 49ers. I think they are low on this list for me because I don't think there's anybody's jobs that are at stake necessarily. This is purely reputation based between Kyle Shanahan and Brock Purdy. You didn't really have too many people changing their opinions on these two people based off of the way that the Super Bowl played out. I think that Shanahan is definitely more so under pressure than Purdy is, because Shanahan has been in the moment for a handful more years. He's been there in this same situation without Brock Purdy, and we've talked a ton about him over the past few weeks. We know the story. He's had lots of regular season success. He has an 8-4 record in the playoffs, but people say that Shanahan can't win a big game because he hasn't won the big game, the Super Bowl. Between his tenure as an offensive coordinator with the Falcons and head coach with the Niners, he's won 3 NFC championships. So he's won 3 of the second biggest games, but until he gets that Super Bowl ring, this is a narrative that's going to surround him. The Niners, that is, get to return the majority of their key players. They only have 3 guys that are upcoming free agents that played over 50% of snaps for the Niners last season. That's Tayshaun Gibson, Chase Young, and Sebastian Joseph Day. And the Niners can also get a compensatory, possibly day 2 pick, possibly as high as the 3rd round pick, if Chase Young walks and signs somewhere else. They don't have tons of cap flexibility because of how many guys they have under contract, but as we know, they have a very talented roster and obviously a group that just went to the Super Bowl. They are more than capable of potentially winning that Super Bowl with the guys that they have in-house right now. So they have the draft to improve some, and whatever other sort of marginal moves they make along the lines in the offseason. But they should be, retooled up, ready to go. They get Talanoa Hufanga back next year. You ideally get Dre Greenlaw back. I know that it was a torn Achilles in the Super Bowl that takes a lot of time to recover from, but ideally by the playoffs, he'll be back for them, and they get a chance to run this thing back. Number 4, I have the Philadelphia Eagles. You have a very loud fan base, a very loud head coach that across the country are not the most popular with a lot of people. I personally thought that unfairly, Nick Sirianni's job was being questioned after they sort of collapsed down the second half of this season. He and the franchise, the fan base, all put a lot of blame on the turnover amongst their coordinators, which is very fair. It is not an easy thing to recover from. So now they come in with a new offensive coordinator in Kellen Moore, a new defensive coordinator in Vic Fangio, who I think they're both upgrades from what they had last season. But they have been a little bit, especially, tons of talk about the tush push, which is also pretty stupid. Anybody trying to ban it, that's like, I don't know what to tell you. There's nothing unfair about that play at all, other than that they're just really good at it. Still waiting to see what the final decision from Jason Kelce is. I think that would be a huge loss for them if he is done. I know that it was reported that he retired, and then he sort of said that he was sort of still mulling it over. He didn't think that he was in the position right after the game ended to make a fully conclusive decision. So we will see about that. And then Jalen Hurts here, his contract is going to double in terms of cap hit this season for them, and it's going to make its way up to $21 million, $31 million, $45 million, and then $54 million over the next few seasons. I like Jalen Hurts. I think that he has an incredible story dating back to college, but we have to see how much he's able to elevate his team as his cap hit increases. And I think that there are a lot of people who have talked about Hurts in the past and the sort of lower ceiling there is with him in terms of his full passing ability, which is in part why he dropped to a 2nd round pick. Number 3, I have the Baltimore Ravens. They were seen to have the best roster in the league this past season, and they fell flat in the big moment once again. And we are set for an offseason and going into next year of the typical discourse where Lamar Jackson has now won multiple MVP awards, wins his 2nd this past season, and now there's going to be a narrative about the lack of postseason success. And there was that narrative sort of coming into these playoffs, which I defended because it had been some years since we actually saw him in the playoffs, and I thought that a more mature version of Lamar and a healthier version of Lamar was going to be enough to sort of overcome that reputation. And even, early in that game against the Chiefs, when he makes that touchdown throw to Zay Flowers, I'm like, oh my God, finally we can move on from this dumb narrative. But of course, the offense really doesn't do much else after that. Lamar Jackson himself doesn't really do anything to, even in the Josh Allen sense, sort of compete with Patrick Mahomes and put on any sort of a show. And we're looking at a lot of statistical drop-offs for Lamar Jackson now. The touchdown to interception rate significantly drops off. It's just a 1-to-1 in the postseason. The QB rate drops off. Yards per attempt are down for him. And I still believe in Lamar, but he does have to prove himself at a certain point. I think that there are also some factors with GM Eric DeCosta and the job that he's going to have to do, because they have a good amount of contributing players from last season that are going to be upcoming free agents. So how they navigate all of that, specifically on the defensive end, in terms of what they choose to do with their money that way. I also am very curious to see how they continue to help Lamar. They go out, they draft Zay Flowers, who has been the best weapon, well, other than Mark Andrews, that is, but the best receiver that he has had during his career in Baltimore, and it resulted in a lot of success. And this is a team that also, dealt with a lot of injuries at running back, but receivers have been a big struggle for them, whiffing on a few first-round guys in the past while Lamar is there. You get somebody in Flowers, and now OBJ, Nelson Aguilar, and Devin Duvernay are all going to be free agents for them. How are they going to retool the offense? Number 2, I have the Dallas Cowboys. They're always going to be under pressure when they just have the spotlight on them so much. But it's even enhanced this year because Jerry Jones said that they will be going all in. Still going to figure out what that means necessarily in terms of what types of moves they're going to make. But there's also added drama, as Cowboys legend Emmitt Smith called them out a few weeks ago, quoting them saying their attitude is something along the lines of, "We are the Cowboys, tell me how good I am." He mentioned the lore that comes with Cowboys football and the flaunting it on social media. Potentially took a shot at Micah Parsons in terms of the podcast. But, this is sort of getting to be a point where we're seeing this drought without even a conference championship appearance. And, for especially a team that is going to be going into a handful of very big financial moves they need to make, paying CeeDee Lamb, paying Micah Parsons, and paying Dak Prescott going into his final year of his contract. NFL insider Jordan Schultz just said that he expects Dak to, quote, command somewhere along the lines of $60 million a year. And, he had a great season this year, was an MVP candidate, but that is a ton of money to cough up to one guy, especially when you have a bunch of other young talent on the roster that you need to pay as well. They bring back Mike McCarthy for another year. This has to be a prove-it year for him. So definitely a lot of storylines around them. Then my number 1 team that I think is under the most pressure to win this year is the Buffalo Bills. I think there are many people within this building in Buffalo that have the pressure on their backs. A lot of people were saying that Josh Allen was in this conversation with Mahomes and that they are the current age Peyton versus Brady rivalry. Mahomes is now 3-0 against Allen and the Bills in the playoffs during this stretch. They beat them in the divisional round this year. And early on, Tom Brady got the best of Peyton Manning. So not saying this can't be reversed whatsoever, but it is not looking very good for those conversations early. And I still will confidently say that Josh Allen is a top 3 quarterback in the league, and that Mahomes is also just in a stratosphere of his own. I think that they're just on two different tiers despite still being in that top three together. It's possible for the perception to sort of change there, but it starts with at least getting one of these matchups in the postseason. And like I said, it's not just on the shoulders of Josh Allen. I think that Sean McDermott still has a lot to prove. He has a regular season win percentage of 64. He's led the Bills to the playoffs in 6 of his 7 seasons there, but he has a losing record at 5-6 once being in the playoffs. So, definitely a very solid coach, but it's a matter of, as far as head coaching wise, and I know that they were dealing with some drama around their offensive coordinator situation, but at a certain point you have to start winning these playoff games more regularly, and we just haven't seen that from them quite yet. And then I think that their general manager, Brandon Beane, also has a lot of pressure on himself. He dished out a lot of money to Von Miller the other offseason and got a lot of underwhelming return for that. Now, Von was dealing with injuries, so I don't want to necessarily kill him in this. He was an older guy, though, that they decided to give this money to, and they sort of paid the price quite literally. And now they're going into a year where they are currently 29th, according to Pro Football Focus, in terms of salary cap space going into this offseason, and they have some big decisions to make with how they are going to improve this team, decisions to make with Tre'Davious White and Stephon Diggs, where they're both under contract for at least the next couple seasons, but there's a lot of money tied up in them. There's concerns with both of them. White has two season-ending injuries within the past 3 seasons, and Stephon Diggs, for as talented of a player he is, he sort of brings that level of drama. There's been plenty of talk of him being unhappy with the Bills during training camp and all of that, and he's been a little bit underwhelming when it is time for the playoffs. So they have a lot of decisions to make, and Brandon Beane is going to have to be the one to sort of right the ship there. But that is my list of the 6 teams with the most pressure to win next season, and that is all I have for today. Thank you very much for tuning in. We will be back tomorrow. Thank you very much to the GSMC Sports Network for allowing us to host this show, and we will see you tomorrow. So catch you then. Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet. Damn, ain't that great. I don't wanna go.